I created a startup, but my partners decided to kick me out of my own company. I didn't argue, I just quietly came up with a new idea and sold it to the competitors. 6 months later, my friends went bankrupt, while I secured investments. They even tried to come back to me, but it was already too late. They pushed me out of the company I built, so I gave them a farewell they would never forget. They voted me away in a windowless room and called it strategic realignment, and for a moment I felt the world tilt. I had sketched the product on napkins, defended features in investor rooms, and refused easy shortcuts that would have hollowed out what we promised users. For names were on the cap table. 3 of them learned how to smile like partners and how to sharpen knives behind keyboards. They moved my title into a footnote, rerouted my responsibilities to an eager-faced newcomer, and rewrote founder narratives in meeting minutes. It hurt less as an injury to bank accounts and more as theft of a story I had told myself for years. I could have raged, public denunciations, viral posts, the classic founder meltdown, but spectacle feeds its own oxygen. I wanted consequence, not headlines. I chose a slow, surgical answer: rebuild quietly, solve the problem they ignored, and let the market adjudicate the verdict. First, I vanished from the startup social circuit. I stopped speaking at panels, I stopped smiling for their celebratory launch photos, and I stopped feeding the rumor mill. My absence was camouflage. While they soaked in the heat of press releases and glossy decks, I spent nights with a laptop, a whiteboard, and relentless lists of what customers really hated about our product. Where they had tolerated churn, I ran experiments. Where they blamed legacy constraints, I sketched elegant integrations. Where they shrugged at onboarding drop-off, I obsessed over the single modal that confused new users. I stole none of their code. Theft would have been petty and risky. Instead, I mined public feedback, anonymized user interviews, and the neglected metrics dashboards they had dismissed. My plan had 3 moves: disappear, build, and partner. Disappear so they would forget my fingerprints on any future story. Build something complementary that fixed the exact pain they had normalized. Partner with adjacent players who measured outcomes in retention and revenue, not origin stories. I launched a lean prototype on a hush list, a few trusted customers, a crisp promise: have onboarding time or we don't bill. The pilots were surgical and merciless in their outcomes. Numbers don't lie, and the numbers told a story my old company had refused to read. Their PR machine produced glossy slides about bold pivots and growth initiatives. They hired a charismatic head of growth and doubled ad spend to mask product rot. But ad spend does not lift retention or shorten time to value. When our integrated pilot rolled out at a competitor's client, the results were public and stark. Onboarding time halved, churn dropped, net promoter rose. Customers tweeted relief, not because of my origin tale, but because the product stopped costing them time. 6 months later, their runway was a rumor in investor Slack channels. Conversations that had once been full of promises grew short and precise. What are your unit economics? Where is revenue actually coming from? Board meetings that had once reorganized titles now rehearsed layoffs. Desperate, they called me. At first they sounded professional. Can we talk? Then humbled. We made mistakes. Can we find a way back? I listened. I let their messages sit like stones. I did not respond with a clap of triumph, only with measured counteroffers that protected what I had built. Distribution deals that scaled my product without handing them a roadmap back into the room, investment that preserved control and product independence, partnerships that served customers rather than resurrected old alliances. Their pleas shifted into quiet apologies and then into legal counsels who probed for access designed to resurrect equity or influence. I declined anything that smelled like a booby trap. I replayed the betrayal in small private rituals. The meeting where they smiled and voted, the way a certain partner would tap their pen while saying, "We need to scale," as if scale were a magic wand that erased ethical missteps. Those little details became fuel, not for hatred, but for precision. I hired a freelance UX researcher and an analytics engineer to test hypotheses that my old team had called too narrow. We built a small but furious culture of iteration. 1-week sprints, immediate user feedback loops, release notes that read like promises kept. We documented everything: experiments that failed and why, wins, and the statistical significance that made investors take notes instead of photos. There were lonely nights. I replayed doubts. Had I become the kind of quiet strategist who waits for karma to do the heavy lifting? Maybe. But the alternative, trading my dignity for the noise of social revenge, felt like losing twice. I wanted to be able to sleep on decisions and sign a contract without tasting bitterness. The irony was delicious. They had assumed that removing me would speed them to a mythical future. Instead, their shortcut exposed a product built on tolerated compromises. My approach was not patience for its own sake. It was a pragmatic wager that good product yields durable relationships and that real customers punish hollow promises. When the market finally chose, it did so in small, human ways. Fewer support tickets, more renewals, and a customer success manager texting, "This saved us," at midnight. I built measurable, repeatable features and produced clean charts and case notes. There were lonely nights, but there were also small messages from users whose teams avoided layoffs because the workflow we fixed shaved hours from a process. That was currency. While they scrambled to spin narratives, customers quietly left their platforms because the friction became untenable. Their attempts to return were awkward and thin. Some begged, some tried to rewrite history, and a few attempted to network their way back into relevance. I met with two of them once, in a neutral cafe. They offered contrite faces and optimistic plans, but I saw the old pattern: shortcuts, charm, and a hunger for optics over craft, the very behavior that had driven them to oust me. I gave them closure, not clemency. I offered conditions that would have required proof, not promises, and they chose other paths. When the bankruptcy filing finally arrived, it was not cinematic. It came as a terse formality and a 2-paragraph press release. No exploding boardroom, no melodramatic monologues, just the hollow ring of curtailed payrolls and a few LinkedIn posts about next chapters. My new venture hired steadily, hit predictable metrics, and listened to customers who had been previously gaslit into acceptance. Investors that once glanced at their slides now called my team to ask about scalable retention approaches. Satisfaction arrived not in fireworks but in cold clarity. Revenge was not a blaze. It was craft. There is a sharp sweetness in letting value do the talking. When a client messages at midnight to say a single feature stopped them from losing a contract, you understand the currency of useful work. I could have screamed my betrayal into the public square, but spectacle would have fed their victimhood. Instead, the market decided who was useful and who was a mirage. The story that mattered was not the betrayal itself but the remedy I chose: patience, product, and measurable impact. I hired carefully, with interviews that emphasized humility and craft over swagger. When former partners attempted to return, their offers felt like badly written lines in a play I no longer wanted a ticket to. Their remorse was palpable, but insufficient. Sometimes retribution is less about watching someone fall and more about refusing to hold the ladder they used to climb over you. Would you have done the same, kept quiet and built until the market decided, or would you have called them out publicly and burned the bridge? What would you have done? Tell me, what would you choose? They stole my company, but I stole their future. That sentence repeated in my mind like a mantra, steady and sharp, reminding me that silence was not surrender. The night after the boardroom ambush, I sat in my apartment staring at the dim glow of my laptop screen. My inbox was already filling with sanitized announcements from my so-called partners, excited about the next chapter, restructuring for growth, proud of the journey so far. Their PR machine was in overdrive, painting a picture of unity while carefully scrubbing me out of the narrative. I didn't reply. I didn't fight. I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey, opened a blank document, and typed 3 words at the top: build. Smarter. Faster. That was my plan. At first, it felt like freefall. All the investor calls I'd cultivated, all the warm leads I had nurtured, were now out of reach. Or so it seemed. They had stripped me of the logo, the brand, the bank account, but not of my mind. I still carried the scars of every product meeting where they had rolled their eyes at customer complaints. I remembered the exact pain points they had dismissed, the features they insisted were too expensive, and the opportunities they had arrogantly ignored because they didn't fit their flashy pitch deck. They thought they had cornered me, but what they had really done was hand me a blueprint for their downfall. So I started with the list. It wasn't pretty, Just a mess of bullet points scribbled on paper and sticky notes plastered across my walls. Onboarding too long. UX clunky. Pricing opaque. Integrations fragile. Support overwhelmed. Each note was a fragment of user frustration that had been laughed off in meeting rooms full of coffee breath and false confidence. I turned those fragments into my weapon. Instead of pitching a revolution, I built solutions. Tiny, surgical fixes that addressed the very blind spots my partners had ignored. And while I built, I disappeared. I ghosted the industry happy hours, skipped the flashy demo days, ignored the founder brunches where everyone clapped for vaporware. Let them bask in the spotlight. Let them tweet about record growth, while hemorrhaging users behind the curtain. My invisibility was my shield. I wanted them to forget me, to believe I had given up. The quieter I was, the less they suspected. The nights blurred into weeks. I coded until my fingers cramped, tested prototypes on a handful of trusted friends, and pushed updates with a kind of manic discipline. But I wasn't just writing code. I was writing their obituary. Every line of code was a rebuttal to some arrogant remark they had thrown at me. That's not a priority. Click. Feature built. Customers won't care. Wrong. Users cheered when I fixed the simplest pain points. I was obsessed, yes, but obsession was my fuel. The breakthrough came when I reached out to one of their biggest clients. Quietly, indirectly, through a friend of a friend. I didn't pitch myself as competition. I offered a side tool, a harmless add-on that just happened to solve the single problem that had driven their customer support team insane. They agreed to try it. 2 weeks later, their churn rate dropped, onboarding time halved, and for the first time, the client's feedback form was filled with actual praise instead of complaints. That was all the proof I needed. Word traveled, not loudly, but effectively. Investors who had politely ghosted me after the coup began sliding back into my DMs. Heard you're working on something interesting, they said, suddenly curious again. Competitors, the ones my partners used to mock at conferences, wanted to talk partnerships. I didn't rush. I didn't brag. I let the numbers speak. Lower churn, higher retention, happier customers. Cold, undeniable metrics. Meanwhile, my ex-partners were burning cash like it was kindling. Their shiny new head of growth bragged about doubling ad spend, but ads can't fix a broken product. Their social media was all hype and no substance, a fireworks show masking a crumbling foundation. The irony? They were celebrating milestones I had already surpassed in silence. Every post of theirs was another reminder of how far behind they actually were. The more they ignored reality, the more desperate they became. Rumors began to spread in Slack groups and LinkedIn whispers. Are they actually profitable? I heard their churn rate is brutal. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. And through it all, I kept building. Patient, precise, ruthless. But here's the delicious part. They didn't even realize where the knife was coming from. They thought their problems were external, market shifts, difficult conditions. They never suspected the quiet ghost they had exiled was the one pulling the strings of their decline. When I finally revealed my product, it wasn't with fireworks or a press release. It was with a quiet partnership announcement. Just one line, excited to integrate with competitor's name to help customers achieve faster onboarding. That single tweet sent ripples. Their biggest rival now had the very thing my old company had failed to deliver. And suddenly, their clients had a choice. Stay with a clunky platform that ignored them, or switch to one that actually listened. The impact wasn't instant, but it was inevitable. Clients began migrating. Slowly at first, then in waves. And the best part? My ex-partners had no idea until it was too late. They thought I had vanished, when in reality, I had been preparing the perfect storm. Would you have done the same? Would you sit quietly, plotting every move, or would you have gone nuclear in public from day one? Tell me, do you think patience makes revenge sweeter, or does silence make it colder? They thought I was gone. But I was everywhere. That was the secret. While they strutted on stage at tech conferences, bragging about market dominance and innovative pivots, I was slipping through the cracks they left behind, weaving myself into conversations they never heard, deals they never saw coming, and contracts they didn't even know existed. Their arrogance blinded them. My patience sharpened me. Every quiet step I took was another nail in the coffin they had built for themselves without even realizing it. By the third month, my prototype wasn't just a side project anymore. It was a living, breathing product that customers loved. Small companies started adopting it first. They were the type of clients my ex-partners had always dismissed as too small to matter. But these insignificant customers became my evangelists. They tweeted about how onboarding time dropped from hours to minutes. They shared stories in forums about how support tickets plummeted after using my tool. They didn't just use my product, they worshipped it. And in the startup world, worship is contagious. Investors, the same ones who had once ghosted me after my partners cut me out, suddenly found their way back into my inbox. At first, I ignored them. Silence was my weapon, and I wanted them hungry. When I finally agreed to a few meetings, I came with hard numbers, not lofty visions. I didn't sell them a dream, I handed them proof. Growth charts, churn reduction, glowing testimonials. Numbers don't lie, and investors love nothing more than inevitability. They leaned in. They wanted in. Meanwhile, my ex-partners were bleeding money. I knew because I still had friends inside their company. Not loyalists, just tired employees who were sick of empty promises. They told me about the chaos, the endless meetings where no one agreed, the layoffs disguised as team optimization, the desperate attempts to close funding rounds that never materialized. Their once bustling Slack channels had turned into graveyards of unanswered questions and passive-aggressive comments. But here's the kicker. They didn't know I was the storm circling around them. Every deal I made, every client I won, chipped away at their fragile empire. And then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived, a major industry player reached out. Not just a competitor, but the competitor, the one my ex-partners feared the most. They had laughed at them once, called them second tier at conferences. Now that same company was asking me for a meeting. I walked into their glass-walled office with no entourage, no theatrics. Just me, my laptop, and my numbers. The room was filled with executives who had been burned too many times by my ex-partner's empty promises. I showed them what I had built. I didn't have to exaggerate. The results spoke for themselves. Faster adoption, happier clients, more efficient scaling. Their eyes lit up. One executive leaned back in his chair and said, This is exactly what we've been waiting for." That meeting was the turning point. A week later, we signed a partnership deal. My tool became part of their ecosystem, instantly gaining access to thousands of users, the same ones my ex-partners had been trying and failing to keep. The irony was too sweet. The company they had mocked was now lifting me higher than I had ever imagined, while their own ship was sinking fast. The cracks in their empire became fractures. Clients started canceling contracts, moving to platforms where my product now lived. Their customer success managers scrambled to keep up, sending desperate emails like, "We're working on a solution. Please give us more time." But time was the one thing they didn't have. Their investors grew restless, questioning their leadership, their vision, their future. And behind the scenes, they scrambled to figure out who was fueling this sudden exodus. Then came the desperate move. They reached out to me. First with vague messages, "Hey, long time no see. Let's catch up." Then with more direct pleas, "We'd love to explore potential collaboration opportunities." I almost laughed when I read those words. Collaboration. After they'd stabbed me in the back and erased me from the company I had built, now they wanted to join forces? The audacity was almost admirable. Almost. I didn't respond right away. I let them stew. Days turned into weeks, and their messages grew more frantic. One of them even called me late at night, his voice shaky. "We made mistakes," he admitted. "We shouldn't have pushed you out. We need you." Those words, those delicious words, were worth every sleepless night, every silent grind, every ounce of patience I had poured into my revenge. They needed me, but I didn't need them. By the time I finally agreed to meet, their empire was already on its knees. We sat in the same kind of sterile conference room where they had once voted me out, but now the roles were reversed. They looked smaller somehow, deflated, like balloons after the party's over. They pitched me ideas of merging, of rebuilding the dream together. I let them talk. I nodded, smiled even, but inside I was savoring every second. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've already moved on. My product is doing fine without you. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause I had ever heard. They realized in that moment that they had lost everything. Not just the company, not just the clients, but me, the one person who could have saved them. And here's the thing. I didn't slam the door. I left it cracked, just enough for them to see what they had thrown away. I wanted them to live with the knowledge that they had destroyed their own future the moment they betrayed me. That was the true revenge. Not just winning, but letting them watch me win without them. Would you have done the same? Would you have sat across from your betrayers, smiled politely, and told them no? Or would you have taken them back, just to watch them fail again from the inside? What would you do if the people who stabbed you in the back came crawling back, begging for mercy? They thought they could crawl back into my life. But I wasn't there to save them, I was there to bury them. That's the thought that played on repeat as I watched my ex-partners squirm across the table. Their once polished suits hung loose on their shoulders, their smiles were tight, forced, and their eyes darted like cornered animals. They had built their empire on arrogance and betrayal, and now they were choking on it. And the sweetest part? I didn't even need to raise my voice. My silence, my refusal, was louder than anything they could have imagined. But I didn't stop there. No, this was the part where patience ended and precision began. Until then, I had let the market play executioner. Now, I was ready to tighten the noose myself. The partnership deal I had signed with their biggest competitor wasn't just a business move, it was a declaration of war. My product became the backbone of that competitor's platform, and with every new integration, every glowing case study, my ex-partner's company lost ground. Their clients didn't just walk away. They sprinted. And I made sure they knew exactly where they were sprinting to, me. Word spread quickly. Users weren't just switching because of the features. They were switching because of the story. The industry loves drama, and nothing is juicier than a betrayal turned upside down. Investors whispered about how the ousted founder had risen from the ashes. Journalists started sniffing around, eager for the underdog comeback narrative. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was untouchable. Every article that praised my new venture was another dagger in their reputation. Another reminder that the founders who had betrayed me were now drowning in their own incompetence. Meanwhile, their panic turned into desperation. They slashed prices to try and lure back clients. They spammed investors with half-baked roadmaps and fake optimism. They even rushed out a new product feature that was suspiciously similar to mine, but it was sloppy, buggy, and riddled with complaints. Customers weren't fooled. They saw through the charade. It wasn't innovation, it was imitation, and a bad one at that. And then came the event, the annual industry summit. The same summit where, a year earlier, they had stood on stage, puffed up with self-importance, announcing their bold new direction without me. I had sat in the audience that day, swallowing my rage, vowing I would return. And now return I did, but not as a silent spectator. This time, I was the one on stage. The room was packed with executives, investors, journalists, and rivals. My presentation wasn't flashy. No neon slides, no hollow promises. Just cold, undeniable results. I showed before and after graphs, customer testimonials, growth curves that made jaws drop. I demonstrated live how our product solved problems in seconds that had plagued users for years. The applause wasn't just polite, it was electric. People stood, clapped, cheered. Cameras flashed. My ex-partners, sitting in the back row, looked like ghosts. That was the climax. The moment revenge stopped being private satisfaction and became public humiliation. They had built their identities around being visionaries, and now the entire industry saw them for what they really were. Frauds who had cut out the one person capable of delivering real innovation. After the summit, the fallout was immediate. Investors pulled their money out of my ex-partner's company. Employees jumped ship, many of them reaching out to me for roles in my growing team. Their Slack channels, once bustling with fake optimism, turned into graveyards of farewell messages. Clients canceled contracts in droves. Within weeks, their company was a shell. And then, the final twist, they begged again. Not for collaboration this time, but for survival. They offered to sell me what was left of the company for scraps, as if I might take pity and absorb their carcass. I considered it briefly, but then I smiled and declined. Why buy what I had already destroyed? Why waste resources on ashes when I was already standing in fireproof armor? Instead, I made sure their downfall was complete. I gave interviews where I didn't even mention their names. I didn't need to. Everyone knew the story, and by refusing to acknowledge them, I erased them more thoroughly than bankruptcy ever could. They weren't rivals anymore. They were ghosts, footnotes in a narrative that now belonged entirely to me. The day their bankruptcy papers went public, I was on a flight to meet new investors in New York. I read the announcement on my phone, chuckled, and went back to reviewing pitch decks. My team was scaling, my product was thriving, and my name was no longer a whisper, it was a headline. They had tried to bury me, but instead, they had planted me. And now, I was the tree casting shade over their graves. Would you have done it? Would you have stood on that stage, looked your betrayers in the eyes, and let the entire industry applaud your revenge? Or would you have taken the final step and bought their ruins just to crush them from the inside? Tell me, how far would you go for justice? They had sought forgiveness, then survival, then a bargain, each plea a little more frantic than the last. I refused to sanctify their mistakes with mercy. Revenge, I had learned, is not a single explosive act but a slow rewriting of fate. Remake the world they tried to steal, and let the consequences fall where they may. I did not relish watching people suffer. I relished the justice of cause and effect, the ethical neatness of a marketplace that rewards care and punishes negligence. In the weeks after their collapse, I focused on repair rather than ruin. My team expanded. A few of the engineers who had stayed through the betrayal joined me, but so did many who had left our old company earlier, tired of the drama that came with hollow promises. We hired carefully, looking for humility and curiosity. We instituted what I called empathy audits on product decisions. Before shipping, someone had to justify how a change would tangibly help a real person in a real hour of need. Our investor meetings stopped being flash sales and started being sober conversations about retention curves and margins. We turned attention toward customers who had been the most burned by the industry's vanity. Not everyone cheered. Some accused me of pettiness, of enjoying a downfall that had real-world consequences for employees who had been collateral damage. Those criticisms stuck because they were partly true. My strategy had consequences, but context mattered. The board that dissolved my role had made choices that hid real problems under polished slides. When leadership sacrifices truth for optics, customers lose, employees lose, and the price is paid by people least able to afford it. I had no desire to gloat, yet I insisted on accountability. That meant transparency about how we regained trust. Public postmortems, open roadmaps, and customer advisory boards that could veto harmful changes. Money followed honesty. Investors respected proof. Customers respected reliability. Our revenue grew not because of hype, but because our product solved workaday problems others ignored. I invested in people, not just features, training teams in customer empathy, building better onboarding documentation, and offering credits to clients who had lost faith. Those gestures cost money up front, but they paid in loyalty. A company that fixes its mistakes transparently builds an advantage time cannot buy. As for my ex-partners, some found quiet paths forward. A few left the tech world entirely. Restaurants, consultancy, startups in different verticals where the stakes were lower and the smoke machines fewer. One wrote me a long, contrite email admitting he had been dazzled by the idea of scale at all costs, and had forgotten that product is people. He asked for forgiveness, not equity. I replied with a short note wishing him well. Another tried to flip the narrative, penning op-eds about resilience and miscommunication. Words rearranged memories, but they cannot change ledgers and user logs. Their accounts were archived. Their brand, a cautionary tale. There were nights I replayed choices and wondered if I had stooped to their level. I had been patient, secretive, and uncompromising. Was that any different from their politicking? The answer, in those quiet hours, was messy. I had used strategy as armor, but I had also set standards. Hiring for humility, building with care, refusing investor demands that would hollow our promises. There is a thin line between tactical silence and moral cowardice. I tried to keep my steps on the right side of that line, but I do not pretend perfection. The sweetest vindication was tiny and human, a customer support transcript where a manager wrote, "Your tool saved our product launch. We would have laid off 2 teammates without it." An email like that is better than a headline, better than awards and speeches. It meant that revenge had become repair. The world we rebuilt was kinder in small, stubborn ways. In time, I grew less interested in revenge as spectacle and more in the architecture of resilience. We invested in redundancy, in documentation, in cultivating a culture where people could speak up without fear that their honesty would be weaponized. We created channels for dissent, safe enough that an engineer could flag a bad decision without being ostracized. We published our failures as case studies so others might avoid the same traps. The courthouse drama some expected never came. There was no cinematic lawsuit, no whispered legal showdown. Part of me was relieved. Litigation would have prolonged the wound, kept the story in the gossip columns, and distracted from the more important work of rebuilding. I chose to let markets and decisions adjudicate the quality of our choices. That decision felt, in the end, like a quiet moral triumph. And yet, when I walked past the skyline and saw banners for newer startups, I felt something akin to mercy. I wanted others to build honestly, to learn that shortcuts make for brittle houses. If my story imparted that lesson, then the price had been worthwhile. The final scene was not a dramatic confrontation but an ordinary Thursday. A small product update rolled out, a bug we'd been chasing for months fixed, a thank you note from a customer who had regained a contract because of it. I closed my laptop, took a breath, and for the first time in a long while, felt at peace. Revenge had been a chapter, not the whole book. The real story, I realized, was about stewardship, taking responsibility for products and people, and refusing to let betrayal become a template. I had been stolen from, yes, but I had also been given a chance to build better, to prove that value endures. So I built. Not to hurt, but to heal, and by doing that, I discovered that justice and utility often walk hand in hand. The collapse of my former company mattered to me only insofar as it taught a lesson. When leadership chooses spectacle over service, the market remembers. There were moments when success felt embarrassing, like wearing someone else's fortune. Humility became my daily practice, thanking the junior engineer who stayed late, calling an early user to ask how we could be better, answering investor questions with empathy rather than spin. In that quiet discipline, something unexpected grew: respect. People started to recommend us not because of a scandal but because they trusted our workmanship. This, more than any headline, was the trophy I wanted. In the end, revenge taught me a strange lesson. Build well, and the world will repay not just your bank account but your dignity. Interactive. If you were in my place, would you have accepted quiet revenge and focused on rebuilding, or would you have sought immediate public retribution? Would mercy have a place in your response, or would you demand accountability that leaves no room for redemption? What would you do now if the people who betrayed you asked to return? Would you let them, forgive them, or watch them fall?